Hi everyone, I think we're live now. Welcome to the SoA at Home Festival afternoon tea with Vaseem Khan. We'll be talking about how life has changed for him during lockdown, as well as how he's staying creative and connected. This is a special edition of our afternoon teas, as this morning we announced the shortlist for our SoA Awards. You can find out more about that on our website, and there should be a link coming into the chat so that you can go and look at those as well. As a judge for this year's Betty Trask Prize and Awards, Vaseem will also be giving us some insight into the winners he and his fellow judges selected, as well as the process of judging itself. So my name is Robyn Law, and I'm the Prizes and Awards Manager at the Society of Authors. I'm part of the team that administers over 20 prizes a year for fiction, non-fiction, poetry, and translation. Vaseem Khan is the author of the best-selling Baby Ganesh Detective Agency series featuring Indian detective Ashwin Chopra and his baby elephant sidekick. The first in the series, The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra, was a Times bestseller and a Waterstones paperback of the year, now translated into 12 languages. The latest instalment, Bad Day at the Vulture Club, was released in August 2019. He's been a judge of the Betty Trask Prize and Awards for debut novels by authors under 35 since 2019. So this event is part of the SoA at Home Festival, a 12-week programme of online events which runs until July. All these sessions are free, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Foundation, Authors Emergency Fund, to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis, please visit the link that is just stuck to the top of the chat and you can donate there. This session will be roughly 45 minutes with about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. If you want to ask any questions, please do just pop them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end. So just to get started, Vaseem, if you could let us know what your working day in lockdown looks like at the moment.
Well, thank you for that lavish introduction, Robyn, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. I know it's not easy if you're juggling kids and juggling work and juggling trying to stay sane throughout all of this. And I know that a lot of people are not as fortunate, say, as some of us who might still have jobs and something constructive to do during the day. So our thoughts are with you. But for the next 45 minutes, we're going to talk books and how authors like myself are trying to cope with this new situation. So it's very much like if you go into a fun house and you see a fun house mirror and life is completely distorted. I'm a person generally of routine, so I tend to follow a strict schedule, which has all gone out the window, obviously, in the current circumstances. I'm trying my best to keep to what I can. I'm sleeping at 2, 3 a.m. most nights now. I don't know, my sleep cycle's gone haywire. Wow. I've never been a bit of an insomniac usually, but this is just even beyond that. But I still try and get up early. I try and do my writing early in the morning. I'm an early writer. And I'll try and get 1,000 words a day done on the current novel that I'm writing, which is called Midnight at Malabar House. It's a new historical crime series set in 1950 in India. And then what I'll do is I'll log on to work. So I still have a day job. It's very, very flexible. I work for University College London's Jill Dando Institute of Security and Crime Science. I manage research projects, and we're doing a lot of work around COVID-related crime, especially cybercrime increases. So that keeps me busy throughout most of the day. But in terms of how authors and people in general can manage, I think you've got to think laterally here. I think the first thing is that you've got to try and keep in touch with the people that you care about, and particularly people that you can whinge to. So don't feel afraid to get on a WhatsApp group with friends and have a good old moan about the situation, because we all need to get it off our chest various times. Surround yourself with things that you like. So I don't know if you can see this lovely vase here. I'm big on vases, so I have a collection of vases around the house. I'm missing cricket season. I'm a keen cricketer, and COVID could not have happened at a worse time. And that's not to make light of the fact that lots of people have suffered badly through it. But I keep this is my trusty cricket bat. I don't know if anyone can see that.
Brilliant.
So I keep this next to me, and I tend to stroke it and cry a bit every now and then. Have cake breaks, lots of cake breaks. I think that's a very, very important part of the creative process.
Yeah.
In my office, I have a small sofa bed. It just happened to be in there. So, I tend to take lots of creative rests on that for thinking about choices. I think the best thing I can say is that you need a daily plan if you're going to do all of these different things. And I know that plan will probably go haywire after a couple of hours, but if you set out at the beginning of the day to achieve certain things, whether it's write X amount or do X or Y, I think it just gives you some shape towards what you're going to do during that day.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm similar with your vase collection. I like jugs. So I've got lots and lots of jugs around the house that are currently all filled with flowers, which I think is also as important as cake breaks. I think flowers in the house make a real difference. So just to move on a little bit to your judging process with the Betty Trask Prize and Awards, just to give everyone listening, if you're not aware, a little bit of background into the Betty Trask, because they're a slightly odd prize where we don't have a shortlist, we have award winners, and then one of those award winners is selected as the prize winner, which is a slightly bigger chunk of money that comes in the award ceremony in June. So there are 4 award winners selected by Vaseem and his fellow judges this year. They were announced this morning. So they are The Familiars by Stacey Halls, The Parisian by Isabella Hamad, Hitch by Catherine Hind, and The Private Joys of Nena Maloney by Okechukwu Nzulu. So if you wanted to give us a little bit of insight into why you chose those titles, Vaseem?
All right, so the first thing to say is that judging, as we all know, is quite subjective. And when you have a responsibility for lots of money and quite a prestigious prize, because, past winners have included people like Zadie Smith and Alex Garland, people who've gone on to have stellar careers. So it's quite a good platform when you award this thing. And you know that when you come in as one of the 3 judges every year, that's your responsibility. But having said that, I think if you read widely and you read a lot, what you do learn is over time what good prose looks like, what good characterization looks like, in general what a good book looks like. And I think of it as something which I call book charisma. So you'll know what that means, because if you pick up a book by an author perhaps you haven't really heard of and you don't know too much about it, and you start reading, and then half an hour later you look up, and all this time has passed and you're completely engrossed, it means that you've got a really good book on your hands, certainly from your point of view. And if you've got experience, as I've said, of reading a lot over many years, you'll also know whether or not that meets a certain good quality standard. And that was the first thing that we as judges decided, that there would be a minimum barrier of quality. As far as these particular books are concerned, I think you're going to ask me some more questions about them later. So I'll tie that together rather than just talking for too long at any one point.
Okay, brilliant. So talking about the judging process, you said you had kind of an idea in mind, but we had to move for your judging meeting was one of the first ones that we actually had to do virtually because of what's happened with the healthcare crisis. So how did you find the virtual judging meeting? Did you find that there were aspects that were better, or was it quite difficult?
Well, we weren't able to go out into the courtyard and hack each other's limbs off as we normally do. No, I worked with the same judges last year, and we get on quite well. Again, judging is one of those things where you have to come in with the mindset of knowing that you're going to fight hard for your particular choices, but ultimately you have to be willing to give up something that is you're passionate about, because there's only so many awards that can be given. And I don't think that aspect changed whether it was online or whether we were face to face. It's not really horse trading. It's mainly achieving consensus around the books that we all felt were truly deserving. And if you notice, most years the Betty Trask Fund Awards up to 6 or 7 awardees, and this year we deliberately chose less because we felt that these were truly the ones that were apart from the ones that we didn't select. So
brilliant. Just to stay on the kind of digital aspect, we were able to get the books to you in 2019 for this prize, but some of our prizes that are open now, it will be mostly digital reading for the judges. How do you find reading online? Is it something you've had to do much of in the lockdown?
Yeah, it is, and it's increasingly going that way. And the world is changing. We're all going to be digital people in about 50 years' time. I'd like to download an AI right now so it can write my next book for me while but I am still a little bit old-fashioned, and I'm sure many of our listeners are too. I do like the feel of a good book, and I'm a sucker for a really good cover. I'll often buy a book just on a brief blurb, but because the cover is so beautiful to look at. Look, we all want to save the rainforests, and we don't want any more orangutans to die. So I will read digital fiction wherever I can, where it makes sense to do so. But if I can get a really nice book with a great cover in my hands, I do appreciate that too.
Yeah, no, me too. So when you got your lovely physical books in the post, was there something that you were looking for when you started reading, or was there anything that really surprised you?
You mean other than a huge check? I think that, I'm going to be completely honest here. Yep. Some of the entries were awful, absolutely awful. We had no idea how they managed to end up on that list. And I only say that not to denigrate anybody, but just to say that the standards have been so high over the years that there were a couple of entries that we felt possibly didn't belong there. But for the vast majority, it was quite tough choosing a long list and then whittling that down in our meeting to the 4 eventual people that we wanted to award. I think what surprised us was the quality of some of the writing was fantastic. And The Parisian, for instance, it's a big book, but it's lavishly written, and it takes it historically, it anatomizes a period in history in the Middle East of great interest to a lot of people. Certainly, it's the beginnings of conflict, which continues to rage. And I think the way that book was written was, for me, quite surprising that a relatively youngish author, Isabella Hamad, who was able to create such luscious prose with such skill. So I think that was a theme throughout.
Yeah. Just as you've mentioned with themes, the shortlist, the award winners catches me out sometimes as well. Take us from dusty contemporary Australian highways to the witch trials of 1612, to, as you've mentioned, the tensions of the Middle East and Europe between the 2 world wars, and finally to the private diary of a Nigerian Mancunian teenager. So these are really disparate settings, but did you find that there were common themes?
Well, I can probably sum that up in 3 words, and that is strong female narratives. And I think this was a theme that struck me as I was reading the big long list. For those of you who don't know, we were tasked to read about 35 or 36 books before whittling that down to a shortlist that we discussed. And this came through in a number of the entries. And I suppose it's to be expected in the wake of the Me Too movement that a lot of stories by women and about women and their experiences, which previously perhaps gatekeepers within the industry didn't feel were either deserving of an audience or there was an audience willing to buy those kind of books, have now changed. And we're now seeing that these books are being written and published. And I think that was quite clear. So you take The Familiars, for instance, by Stacey Halls, one of the awardees, a story about the Pendle witch trials. There were 2 strong female protagonists there that we engage with throughout the course of the story. And you mentioned The Private Joys of Nina Maloney, which, fantastic. It was a book that combined humor and insight into the life of this mixed race teenager, but did it in a way where we could get behind the voice and try to understand and look at the world through this teenager's eyes. So that was a common theme for me.
Brilliant. So this is the 2nd year that you've judged the Betty Trask Prize and Awards. Is there any advice that you might pass on to anyone who's judging a prize for the first time?
I think that if you do not read widely, then you're going to struggle, because yes, the Betty Trask does stipulate the kind of books that it will look at, but and as does any award or prize. But if you read lots of different genres, and I've read and tried to write across loads of different genres. When I was 17, I tried to write a science fiction fantasy novel because I was in my Terry Pratchett phase, and I loved the Discworld series. I tried to write literary novels. I'm writing historical crime now, following on from the Baby Ganesh series. Mm-hmm. If you really want to be a good judge, you need to read widely, so that when it comes to reading different types of entries that come at you from different angles, and I compare the Parisian, this big literary tome, to the Private Joys of Nina Maloney, completely different kinds of books, but still I'm asked to judge them for the Betty Trask Award. So I think that's the thing, to have that open mind and that wide reading behind you so that you can do it justice.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned all these different genres. Are there books that you'd like to see more of in terms of submission list for prizes, such as things like more genre fiction?
Well, I mean, although, as I said, I've written lots of different genres over the years, most of that's been unpublished. I've been published with my Baby Ganesh series, which is a crime novel set in modern India, in Mumbai. So Inspector Chopra is a serious man in his late 40s who retires from the Indian police force. And, as we go through the books in the series, it's 5 of them now, he tackles various murders and kidnappings. So the crimes are quite serious, but he also inherits this baby elephant at the beginning of book 1, and he has to try and build that elephant into his life. So what the books are trying to do is take a serious look at India, because I try and showcase some of the darker aspects of India that we don't see, because we're a bit guilty in the West of mythologizing India and turning it into a land of swamis and snake charmers. It might surprise our listeners to realize that Indians don't normally just get up and dance in choreographed numbers in the street. So for me, I would like to see more genre fiction, but not at the expense of quality and what the Betty Trask Award is for. And it really is to spot talent, as you said, under the age of 35, that we feel can build upon that debut entry and create for themselves a career as a writer that people will follow and continue to read over the years, whatever they're writing.
Brilliant. So to move just away from the awards and more onto your fiction, which you've just been mentioning as well. So the promotion for our awards obviously is now all online, and your paperback release of Bad Day at the Vulture Club happened just at the start of March. Have you been promoting that online, and how have you found it?
Well, I think I did a video and I joked that it was like sending a soldier into no man's land armed with a banana, and that's literally what it feels like to launch books at the moment. So that's a gratuitous plug.
Do.
That's the book itself, Bad Day at the Vulture Club. It's the 5th book in the series, and it's Inspector Chopra is tasked to investigate the murder of a Parsi gentleman in Bombay, and the Parsis are a small but unique community and very influential in India, because they, unlike Hindus, they don't cremate their dead. Unlike Muslims, they don't bury their dead. They leave their dead out in stone structures in the middle of Bombay called Towers of Silence for vultures to eat. It's a process called excarnation. And when I lived in India for a decade, and that's why I write these books, and it wasn't until I met a Parsi that I found anything out about this at all, and that stayed with me all of these years. And I thought it would be great to explore that in a book. But it's been very difficult, let's be honest. You've got 700 independent bookshops in this country, all closed. Some of them are you're able to order online, but they're not really set up to do a lot of that kind of stuff. You've got Amazon, yes, but Amazon was prioritizing the delivery of toilet rolls so that people don't have heart attacks. So that's not been easy. And of course, all of the book tour. I had a national book tour booked, lots of different events that I would be doing, and all of that went out the window. Trying to replace that online, I mean, it's not quite the same experience, because I do like being out there and having that interaction and being able to look at the audience, which I can't see at the moment. I always worry about where to look. Do I look here? Do I look there? And the only benefit, I suppose, is that you can wear shorts when doing it, which you can't really do at festivals. Not that I've got shorts on right now, because I've maintained decorum for this very special event.
Well, I'll take your word for it. Just what you were saying about not being able to see people, do you find that social media has been helpful in terms of bridging that gap of connectivity, or do you sometimes find the need to switch it off?
Well, I'm quite keen on social media, or the social aspect of social media, not so much the trolling and the nonsense that gets talked on it a bit, because I'm a gregarious person. I like people. I'm missing my cricket team, I'm missing my work colleagues, I'm missing my brothers and sisters and nephews and nieces. So for me, I do like the fact that you can connect with people. When I was young, and I was, reading authors that I admired back then, there was absolutely no way on earth that you could ever interact or would ever dream of interacting with those authors. But today I get mail, I get social media tweets and stuff from all around the world. I got a lovely tweet message on my Twitter from a small island of British Columbia, and they have one bookshop, and apparently they have my books and they're super popular on this island. It's probably only 6 people on the island, but still, it's lovely to see, lovely to get a message like that, which could never have happened before the advent of social media and this connected world we now live in. So I'm all in favor of it.
Brilliant. So, and also you've mentioned a little bit your the new book that you're working on. Would you be happy to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the Baby Ganesh series has been 5 novels and 2 novellas. And like most writers, after a period of years, it's not that you get tired of characters, but you feel like challenging yourself again to try and come up with something new. And what I'm writing now is called the Malabar House series. It's set in 1950, just a couple of years after India gained its independence, after the assassination of Gandhi and the horrors of partition. And what we have is I introduce a lady called Persis Wadia, who is India's first female police detective. I mean, in truth, India's first female police detective didn't turn up until the 60s, but this is a more interesting period of time. And the reason is because a lot of people don't realize, but there were still tens of thousands of foreigners living in India after independence. And many of them were in Bombay, and it was still called Bombay then. So the first book is called Midnight at Malabar House. Persis has just joined the police force, so she's in this environment which is, very misogynistic. Nobody wants her there, and it's quite corrupt as well. But she's determined to do the right thing, and she's determined not to be cowed by all of these, senior men around her telling her that she's not fit to do this job. And she somehow ends up with the case of a murdered British diplomat. And then we follow her as she tries to solve this, and we get into some Indian history. So I really enjoyed writing a more serious type of novel, but with Indian history embedded in there as well.
Brilliant. And your own strong female narrative.
Yeah, so it's been different trying to write a female narrative, and I hope that readers will read it and let me know if I've not done justice to a female character.
Mm-hmm. So we do actually have a couple of questions that have been sent in advance by our members, which I will we'll just go to those first. So the first one is from Marty Summerfield, which I think has actually been popping up in the chat as well. I think people are very keen to find out the answer to this question, which is, will you continue to write more of the Baby Ganesh series?
Well, the situation at the moment is that the series hasn't been ended by my publisher. What's happened is that we've agreed that we will write these. So they've given me a 3-book contract in the Malabar House series for now. Mm-hmm. So I'm busy, so that the first one, Midnight at Malabar House, is finished. The second one is about the theft of a 700-year-old copy of Dante's The Divine Comedy, which is in Bombay. A lot of people don't know this, but it's been there for 200 years. And Mussolini tried to buy it back in the 1930s for $1 million, but the Indian government refused. So in this second book in this Malabar House series, which is tentatively called The Dying Day, we see that go missing and murders and things, and so that's what I'm working on now. So we may come back to it, but it's not going to happen in the next 2 years because I've got to finish these books. Mm-hmm. So I know that there's a big fan following for the series, and I'm certainly not going to shut the door on it.
Good to hear. So the second question that we had sent in advance by a member was from, and I apologise if I do get the pronunciation of this wrong, Aparna Kalra. And they ask, your writing combines the real with the detective work with the fantastic in Baby Elephants. Is that deliberate? And also, your style of storytelling is gentle compared to other detective fiction. Is there a lot of room for that?
Well, I think if you look at crime fiction, it's now the world's most popular genre. And I think one reason for that is because it accommodates everyone. So, you've got very, very cozy crime at one end, and at the other end, you've got blood spattered, gory, serial killer crime at the other end. Mm-hmm. And I think there's plenty of happy mediums in between. So my book's somewhere in between, because Chopra is a serious man. These are serious crimes. But the baby elephant, including that, allows me to add a little note of humor in between the gritty depictions of India and these crimes. And I don't expect anyone to take the elephant seriously. I mean, the police don't really use baby elephants. It doesn't sing, it doesn't talk, it doesn't fly. It's a metaphor. It's a symbol of India, and that's how I use it. And I use it as so Chopra is the straight man, so the elephant allows me to create this double act of a little bit of gentle humor.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, so what I might do now is there's quite a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll see if we can get through as many of those as possible. So I'll start off with, there is one from Joan Sumner who asks, have you considered adding phonetics to your helpful glossaries?
I haven't, but we'll take that on board. What you'll find is that in my last 2 or 3 books, I tend not to use any Indian words at all, or almost none. The first book contained maybe a couple of dozen, and I did get a query about that, so we created this glossary online. But the aim now is to try and keep that to an absolute minimum.
Fair enough. Okay, the next one that I've got from the chat is from Lorna Reed, who says, there are so many characters in your books. How do you keep track of them all, and do you keep a biographical file for them?
Well, I am very, very organized, and I do work off a spreadsheet. So I have a spreadsheet which will have tabs for characters, tabs for plot, etc., etc. So I do keep tabs of those characters easily. And when you write a series, after a couple of books, you know most of those characters inside and out. And I always joke that I try when I'm writing to have conversations with Inspector Chopra or whoever I'm currently writing in the scene, because it just helps you to get the dialogue right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so how long has your relationship been? It must be many years with Inspector Chopra now.
Well, people often ask me, who is he based on? And the truth is a lot of him is based on me, because when I lived in India, some of the things that I saw didn't sit well in terms of justice. You've got famous cases of famous people in India have gotten away with anything up to manslaughter. And that doesn't sit well with Chopra. And so part of that's fed into his character from my own perspective.
Brilliant. So we have another 2 more about being desperately keen to read more about him. So we've covered that. Another question we have is from Alison Boyle, just asking, do you think it's possible to be a successful author if you've not been to university?
Oh, absolutely. And there's plenty of examples of authors who've never got anywhere near a university. And what, okay, so I did go to university, and I did accounts because my parents were Asians. And as soon as I told them at age 17 that I was going to be a writer, well, you can imagine the response that I got. So, I was forced to go on, and I'm not knocking it, because I have had a very good career because of it. And I couldn't have got to India. I went there to work as a management consultant, which I couldn't have done if I hadn't gone to LSE to do accounts. But there's absolutely no requirement to go to university, even to study creative writing. The most important thing is this, and I can tell you this because I know a number of authors who've gone down this route and been successful. You need to be reading a lot, and you need to be reading from a young age, and you need to be writing and editing every day from a relatively youngish age. Because it took me 23 years to get published, 7 different novels which were rejected across different genres. And every few years I'd complete one, send it out to 30 odd agents, collect my rejection letters, cry for a bit, and then pick myself up off the floor and write something else. And what you realize is that going back, the books that you write when you're 17 are rubbish. And you don't have the distance to be able to say to judge that. By the time you get to your 5th or 6th book, your writing will have improved immeasurably. And there is a cutoff, there's a standard. My agency that represents me has been around for 100 years. They get 4,000 or 5,000 submissions a year. They cannot read every single one of those cover to cover. So what they do is they look at the first few pages. If the quality of writing is not up to the right standard, they will bin that. They'll never even get to your plot. So that's why it's quite important to keep writing throughout your life, so that your quality is there, and then it's about a bit of luck getting the right plot on the right desk at the right time.
Yeah. You mentioned there's seven novels that were rejected before. Is there anything salvageable in there?
Oh yeah, there's a couple of books in there. There's a huge literary tome that I wrote about, set in Egypt, because I'd spent some time there. But it's a very literary style novel covering 3 generations of a particular family. It started off at 220,000 words a decade ago. I've got it down to 135,000 words now. So I'm going to try and convince my agent next year to try and find a publisher for this.
Brilliant. We'll look forward to that one. Next question from the chat was from Jennifer Morgan. It says, I'm curious what elements you feel are essential to a good crime novel, and how do you go about developing your plots?
Okay, so I can answer that one very simply. There's a big debate whether character or plot matters more. I will always say character, and I'll tell you why. Both are important, but I think character slightly edges it, because if you look at crime series, and I can think of many series that I read, readers, if they are sold on a character, they will forgive you the occasional stumble in your plot. They will forgive you the occasional slightly weaker book in your series. And you can see that with so many authors. But if a plot is no good at all, then it's not going to work. So obviously there has to be some standard in the plot. But if your characters are dull and drab and your plot is good, yes, you might get that one book out there and quite successful, but people possibly might switch off and say, well, I wasn't really keen on that character. So for me, that's important. And how do I create them? Again, most writers who are quite creative are like sponges. We're sponges, not the kind that you use to loofah yourself with, but we soak up lots of stuff from everywhere, not just books that we read, but TV and personal circumstances, etc. And we use that to create characters. So as I said, a lot of my characters are based on people. So my new character, Persis Wadia, India's first female police detective, somebody joined my department at UCL 7 or 8 years ago. She was a female policewoman in Bombay. And she's a good friend of mine. So no, obviously she wasn't the first female policewoman. She's a modern lady. But that was one inspiration for me, so that you can get inspiration from anywhere.
Does she know that she is
yeah, she does, I think. Yeah. Well, she'll get a nice acknowledgement in the second book. So
brilliant. What you've just said actually ties into a question that I've seen pop up as well, which is from Liz Mason, which was, have you used actual crimes to develop your storyline?
Well, not a lot of crimes involve baby elephants in the picture, but yes, I have, in the sense that, so if you read The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra, the first book in my Baby Ganesh series, I'm not going to reveal what happens, but as you go through, at the beginning you see a poor boy who is murdered, and Chopra realizes that his seniors don't want to investigate this death. And that's quite common, unfortunately, in India. If somebody is poor, a very cursory investigation takes place because the family has no influence at all, and the cops are too busy or underpaid or busy doing something else, or they just don't want to. The Indian police service does have a terrible reputation. So in that sense, a lot of that background material feeds in from the reality in India. And the third book, The Strange Disappearance of a Bollywood Star, is the kidnapping of an Indian film star. And that's based directly on various incidents that have happened in the Bollywood movie industry, which between the 70s and the late 90s, because the government deregulated it, it meant that Bombay's gangsters, organized crime, funded many of these movies. And of course, when you let the gangsters into your house, they want to call the shots. And when producers and directors and actors didn't do what they were told, they were extorted, they were beaten. There's a famous case of a famous director who was shot in the street. He survived, luckily, but so that was based on that reality.
Oh, so some of them then. More questions coming in all the time. So let me just find another one for you. One from Lynn McVernon, who says, how/when did your first publishing contract happen? And how did you feel, brackets, apart from knocked out?
So I was in the office. I remember this very well. It was about 5 years ago. And, I got a call from my agent who'd agreed to take the book on and find a publisher. and he said, Vaz, are you sitting down? Because not only do I have a publisher for you, but I have a huge publisher, Hodder, and not only do they want to publish that book, but they want to publish 4 books in the series, which is quite rare for a new author. And so for me, I fell off my chair, and I might have shouted something very loudly, which made my colleagues look around. And I think that was just the best moment. Having waited, remember, 23 years and 7 rejected novels to get there.
Yeah, fantastic. Right, so next we have one from Julie Phillips, who says, in light of COVID and the future effects it might have on society and publishing, what advice do you have for a writer who hasn't yet had a novel published, and what is the best thing they can do?
Well, what I'd like to do is a very Boris Johnson type, incredibly clear set of instructions. So write, but don't write. So can you repeat the last bit of that question, of that COVID question?
Oh, yeah, sure. So what advice do you have for a writer who hasn't yet had a novel published, and what is the best thing that they can do?
Well, bearing in mind what I said earlier about making sure that you've written enough so that the quality of your prose is good enough, what I will say is this: agents are incredibly hard pushed to read everything that's sent to them. So the first 5 pages are so critical in terms of hooking them in. So if you've got a really good plot and your writing is good, but you leave it till page 28 of your submission to actually get to some really good stuff, and you spend 27 pages with, painting the scenery and exposition, that's bad. Don't do that. Get the good stuff up front, and not necessarily, that applies even if you're writing a literary novel. With crime novels, it often happens up front automatically, but even with literary novels, there's no need to spend 30 pages trying to tell us what a room looked like, or what that historical circumstances were. Get something happening at the beginning that is going to draw this agent in.
Yeah, I did once say, I think it was Naomi Wood talking about when she was first agented, and her book, she said, I think it really kicks off when this happens. And she was like, which was halfway through. So it was, the first half was gone.
Incredibly common mistake. I get sent a lot of manuscripts and books to read occasionally for various competitions and things I might be judging, and it's a common mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Next we have Fiona, and I apologize if I pronounce this wrong, Malkline, who has said, how easy do you find it to write from a female point of view? Did it involve a lot of editing and reworking, or how did you go about it?
Well, I didn't find it very difficult at all, to be honest, because I read so much fiction, and a lot of it is first-person female narratives. So you absorb that as time goes by. Of course, I don't expect to get everything right, because I'm not a female, and I'm more than happy to get corrected and picked up on. And I'm hoping that people who've been following my current series and will enjoy these books, and let me know if I've done anything not quite right. So the only answer I have to that is that I've tried my best. I've tried to get the information where I need it. And if you look at the book itself, although we do explore Percis's circumstances as a woman in an only all-male police force and a very patriarchal society, we don't dwell on it to the detriment of the actual plot moving forward that she has to solve.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think that's one of the most important things, really, is when writing a female point of view, is that from the most of the part, just shoot it as you would a male point of view, and that's a good start. Right. Okay. We've got some more in here as well. Becky Bond has said, how many drafts of each book do you do?
I do one. But wow. It's a very, in the sense that it's my draft and I take a lot of time to prepare. I'll spend 3 months prepping before I start writing, doing a lot of research, getting the plot perfectly written down so I know exactly what's happening. Some things will change, but it's generally, I know. I'm not what they call a by the seat of your pants type of writer. I don't like that idea at all. So by the time I finish writing, then I'll re-edit that draft. I'll edit that draft in quite detail, so that by the time my technical first draft goes to my editor, it actually doesn't need a lot of editing, and I've never had to do a lot of editing over the years.
Because you're kind of doing it as you're doing
it every day. So I'll write 1,000 words. I'll come back the next morning and I'll read those, and I'll do a bit of editing. Then I'll write the next 1,000. So I'm always constantly tinkering with it. I hate editing. I hate the process of being told by someone else to go back and redo loads of things. I hate that. So I try to make sure it doesn't happen.
Okay, so you make sure that you avoid it. Brilliant. Next we have Emma Sterling, who's asked what your views are of self-publishing.
Well, I think it's absolutely vital that creative artists have a way and a means to get their work out there without being beholden to the gatekeepers of the publishing industry. And yes, although the industry is changing in the sense that more voices are being allowed in, the fact is that the vast majority of the industry is still made up of the exact same, very samey people. I don't mean that in a denigrating way. I just mean that as a fact. It's a fact.
Yeah.
And they find it very difficult to get out of their current mindset and say, well, let's let in a different kind of voice or a different kind of story. So it's wonderful that there is this self-publishing mechanism out there for people to use. Yes, we understand that there's a great mountain of rubbish that gets published there because there are no barriers. You don't have the editing, you don't have the control.
Yeah.
But there is plenty of really terrific stuff near the top of that pyramid. And I think that that's to the credit of those people who have pursued that and been successful.
Brilliant.
So go for it.
Yeah. I'm just going to pick out one more, I think, or maybe two. There's one that's just come in, which I think you'll really like, which is Amanda Lees, who's asked, are there any connections you can see between writing and cricket?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I'm slightly better at writing than I am at cricket, but I tend to do a lot of writing in the summer on the cricket field because I'm normally an opening batsman. And if you know anything about cricket, that means that you start at the beginning of the day, and I get out very quickly. So I have lots of time to sit on the sidelines. So I take my laptop and I do a bit of writing. I think that both activities are quite gentle, usually. Cricket, if you go for a day of cricket, you can take your laptop and you can literally just pop in and out of what's going on and write. And I think that the writing process itself is also quite gentle, certainly for me.
Right. So last question, which I always ask, what are you reading at the moment?
What am I reading? So I'm reading a couple of really good books. One is called How to Teach Philosophy to Your Dog. And it's an interesting take by an author called Anthony McGowan, who I know. And he's written a very approachable book about philosophy and various aspects of it. And I'm reading it because I needed to research philosophy for something that I'm writing outside of my books. And so I thought this is better than having a very dry philosophy textbook. The other thing that I'm reading, is it on the shelf here? Oh, here it is. This is worth a read for people who love great literary fiction. This book won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2016. It's called The Sympathizer, and it's about the experiences of a Vietnamese man who leaves Vietnam at the end of that war, comes to America, and it has a life there. But it's a wicked satire, and it's just hilarious from start to finish and brilliantly written and well deserving of the Pulitzer.
Fantastic. I think that's probably just about everything that we have time for. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I think that was incredible. And thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for everyone who's been watching. I can see we were up to 94, which is brilliant. And everyone who put questions in the chat as well, those were great. So as I mentioned at the start, all these sessions are free. If you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis, please do. The link is still at the top of the chat. Some more events that we have coming up. Next Monday, we have the Activism in Poetry panel event. We also have Thursday's afternoon tea, which is with Tracy Chevalier. So if you head to societyofauthors.org/events, there are still spaces available to book onto those. If you're on social media and would like to chat about this session anymore, then the festival hashtag is #SoA@home. So thank you very much. Links are in the chat. And again, thank you so much, Vaseem. That was fantastic.
Thank you to everybody for listening.